So over on Blue Sky, I saw Retronauts alum Stuart Jip ranking the Resident Evil games. You can be alum when you're currently on a podcast. Well, anyway, it was ranking the Resident Evil games, and I thought that could be fun. I could do that. So my name's Adrian. I have a podcast called Playing Dread about horror games. I do with my friend Lamont. We've been on hiatus for a little bit, but we're gonna get back into the flow in a second. But I thought this would be a fun thing to do. We haven't done a Resident Evil episode actually, but hopefully we'll get to that someday. But for now, you can hear all my thoughts, and believe me, I've got a lot of them, so we're going to get into it. But first, we're going to start just getting rid of all these online games. I may have played the original Outbreak for like a hot minute at one point, but I'm not really a big online gameplay person. That's not really what I go to Resident Evil for, especially. And I, never heard anything really that made me want to check out like Resident Evil Resistance or Operation Raccoon City or any of these games really from what people have told me. There's going to be some hot takes here. There's going to be some things that like I think Resident Evil fans are like gonna have some feelings about my feelings about but we're just gonna immediately start with original Resident Evil, the original game, and that's going right up here. And look, listen, I feel like the consensus for the original Resident Evil is the game's old, it doesn't hold up, tank controls, yada yada. Listen, this is not nostalgia talking. It might be a little bit of nostalgia talking, but like I literally played this game a couple of days ago for the 40th year anniversary. I played as Chris Redfield, hard mode, got about halfway through, well, not really halfway through, but I did the main mansion part before I got to the gardens, and like I've thought to myself, this is it, this is my definitive, this is what a video game should be, this is my ideal. And I'm saying this as someone who's been making video games now for several years. We'll just leave it at that. And I wrote a whole book with a friend of mine, Chris Totten. We wrote a whole book on 2D level design, and I brought up Resident Evil so much because this game is just immaculate. Like everything is done with intention, everything is thought all the way through about, you're just planning routes, thinking about what you need to do. And if you play efficiently, all of those like hallmarks of Resident Evil, like, oh, you have to conserve ammo, you have to like be careful, you can't save too much because you're limited by ink ribbons. Like if you play efficiently and you play the game a bunch of times, which I think is really how it's meant to be played, none of those things are problems. And tank controls are not a problem. We're probably going to have a lot of discussion about tank controls today. Like it's a real quick learning curve. The tank controls are fine. The game is built around them. Everything plays immaculately. The original Resident Evil is just a chef's kiss of a video game. And right away, let's just get it right out there. The remake is the ideal remake for me, and we'll get into it when we get into the other Resident Evil remakes, the later remakes, which I almost kind of consider their own series. But the original Resident Evil remake, is basically the same game. They added back some additional content, some additional story stuff, which was, really cool. I think the Lisa Trevor stuff all like just adds to the game. But otherwise, it's more of a master quest. It's like the Zelda 64 Ocarina of Time master quest version of the game. It's there for expert players. It makes the game harder and honestly better in most ways. I don't know if I would say I would prefer. So I guess I would say that I prefer the original Resident Evil, but I would rather go back to the remake, mostly because it feels like the definitive version of the same game. The only thing I would actually quibble about, and this might surprise people, is I think that the acting is somewhat worse. And the acting and the writing are somewhat worse in the remake. And again, let's clarify this here. The original Resident Evil's dialogue and script are kind of this like so bad it's good thing. And I think part of the problem with the remake is, something like, take the Jill Sandwich line. The Jill Sandwich line in a vacuum is hilarious. It's, again, it's just kind of like a what, right? And they like try to do this like weird, awkward in the middle thing with the remake. The line is something like, "Oh, if another second, you would have fit nicely into a sandwich," and it's just not as good. It's not as interesting. I think that like the writing in the remake, in an attempt to try and modernize it. But the writing's just not good enough to modernize it in a way that feels okay, in the same way that I think the modern remakes try to do. And I've got my quibbles with those. Again, we'll get to them. Hopefully that makes sense. Anyway, God tier, Resident Evil, original game. The only thing that beats the original Resident Evil, in my personal opinion, is its sequel, Resident Evil 2. This part I don't think is as controversial. I think the only thing controversial is that I wouldn't put Resident Evil in like the original game in like A or B, but like it's S tier along with Resident Evil 2. Um, and the thing is, when you really get down to brass tacks, and there's a really good article from Kimimi, the she-eating game monster, has a blog. She's written about all the Resident Evils, wrote some really good stuff. She has a really good blog on Resident Evil 2 that I think makes a good argument that Resident Evil 2 is not as good as the first game. It's just not as immaculately well designed. Again, the original Resident Evil, like that level design, how you have to kind of consider your route and really think about every single thing that you do in that game. Resident Evil 2 is not as cautious, it's not as careful. It's just like it's the same game but bigger. But there is thought kind of put into it, right? Like, so where in the original Resident Evil, one zombie was a thing you had to contend with. Resident Evil 2, one zombie can still be dangerous, but now you have rooms that have 5 zombies. And, I don't think there is enough ammo in the game to have it so that you can clear out all 5 zombies. And it's a little bit, it's a little bit more touchy-feely in terms of its game design. But there are considerations to things like the fact that like zombies will either get pushed back much farther if you are crowded by a bunch of zombies and you push one zombie away, they all go away. You can only get attacked one at a time. The play experience of Resident Evil 2, not quite as immaculate as that first game, but everything else about it, especially from a personal level, like it's an audacious game. You have to basically play this game 4 times to 100% it. Like, if you haven't played it, the original game, each character got its own disc, and you would have to play disc one as one character, and then you would swap to the other disc to play the other character's side of the story. But there was an alternate version of that story that would play out if you swapped characters. So the story where Claire goes first and then Leon goes second is different from the story when it's Leon first and Claire second. Just the fact that like they even had a version of this game where you got the full story playing both characters. And like even if they had just did that, that would have been enough, right? And then they have the audacity to basically have twice the game with 2 different stories. And they're minor differences, but they do make a difference. The Game Grumps actually just finished a Resident Evil 2 playthrough where they did Leon A, and it's not clear if they're going to do Claire B. One of the cool things that I think that Game Grumps playthrough showed off is just how much more well defined Claire and Leon are as characters, but compared to the original Resident Evil, Jill and Chris are more stand-ins than anything else, but Leon and Claire feel like their own fully realized characters, and, my boy Leon is such a worthless nerd that it's hilarious. Highlighted expertly in that Game Grumps playthrough. In Leon's B-side story, he's got this great part where he's telling Claire over the radio, "Hey, no, hold on, wait a minute, just wait till I get there, I'm gonna help you out." And Claire's like, "No, I'm gonna go take care of this, man, I'll see ya," and then just stops responding to him on the radio, and he goes, Claire, damn it, why does no one ever listen to me?" And it's so good. It's such a great character moment that is just, again, just big and audacious and just like the maximalist version of the original game in so many different ways. Love Resident Evil 2. Personal favorite. I've got a poster off screen. You can't see it for the N64 game that I don't remember. It came with a different Capcom game because I never actually owned the N64 Resident Evil until many years later. But I've had this poster forever. Still hanging in my wall. Absolutely love this game. One interesting thing about this list is it doesn't contain like some of the remixes. So Resident Evil Director's Cut isn't here. TLDR, if you haven't played the director's cut version of Resident Evil, play that version. It has the original game plus the arrange mode. Does not have the really cool FMV sequence uncut, which you might expect from the words director's cut, but we don't have to get into all that here. Just get the director's cut version. Resident Evil 2 has a couple of different versions. Personally, I think the DualShock version is the best one. The N64 version is a miracle that it exists. And yes, if you don't want to play with tank controls, you can do that. But again, I think you're getting a worse experience doing that. The N64 version is okay. If that's the version that you got, then play it. And again, I think it's a miracle that it exists. But if you're gonna play a version of Resident Evil 2, play the DualShock version. That'd be my personal preference. All right, so Nemesis. Now, full disclosure, it's actually been a minute since I played this game. Most of the classic Resident Evils I have played more than a couple of times. So I'm going to place this, and I'm torn. I'm honestly torn between B or C. I think I'm going to go low B, but I reserve judgment on this, and my ranking may change if I go back and play the game. Again, if me and Lamont ever do a podcast on the Resident Evil series, I'll probably go back and play 3 then. I remember the biggest thing about this game for me was that this was the first one that really decided to go hardcore with the puzzles. And as a Silent Hill fan, I really do like good riddles and puzzles in games. One of the things I talk about in the book that I mentioned, like when you're doing puzzles in games, the Resident Evil games, I think we remember them as having these like crazy puzzles and riddles and things, but they're really nothing. It's basically just like do a Sokoban, push this statue where you see like there's a miscolored tile or whatever. That's all the puzzles are in that game. In all of these games, really, there's nothing crazy. Nemesis actually does try to do weird things with the puzzles, and like a lot of them are not explained very well, and you can get stuck on them for a while, and that was a big issue for me. I think Nemesis, however, does elevate this game. I think it's the best part of this game. I think that they completely screw up Nemesis and a lot of the other characters that follow in Nemesis's footsteps, I think are screwed up in later games, and we'll talk about why. But I really think that Nemesis elevates what is otherwise a okay follow up to the other games. But that's personal opinion. It's a B, and it's honestly a low B. It may even be a C. Again, my opinion on this could be changed because this is years out of date. My feelings on this. Speaking of years out of date, Resident Evil Survivor. I absolutely played this game in the day. I did not play it with a light gun, which maybe I have a different opinion on it with the light gun. It's a C. Which might be higher than I think some people were expecting. It's fine. I like it. It's okay. That's really all I got. It's been a long time since I played it, this one, but I remember being pleasantly surprised by it, and I think it's a neat experiment. If anything else, I miss when games could do experiments. I very much am kind of tired of the over-the-shoulder, this is what every 3D action game should look like. Spoilers for when we get to the modern Resident Evils. And I miss the time period where games could just try weird things. And I don't know if any exemplify that. I mean, maybe Outbreak if I had played it. Survivor is a time where just wild experiments could happen. I think Survivor deserves to be a C just because it exists. Anyway, let's move on to one I've played a couple of times, though admittedly it's been a while since I played through the entire game. I booted it up recently. Now, interestingly enough, I've not played Code Veronica X. That's the one that's being depicted here. PlayStation 2, I didn't play the later Dreamcast version, which, if I remember correctly, didn't come out to the United States. I've only ever played the original Code Veronica on Dreamcast, but I played it multiple times because I really like it. I think I like it more than Nemesis, honestly. So we're just gonna put this at a B. I don't know if any of the classic Resident Evils are gonna get lower than a B, folks. Just putting it out there. Yeah, Code Veronica. Hard to know what to talk about this one. It feels like more Resident Evil 2, except that you only get one playthrough of the game. You play the first part as Claire, and the second part is Chris. And I think you go back to Claire at another point towards the end of the game, if I'm remembering correctly. Lots of really fun set pieces. This is the first Resident Evil that I felt got really weird. I mean, Resident Evil's always been weird, right? With the Cronenberg style body horror that Resident Evil 2 has, and you know, because we have to like keep figuring out how do we evolve beyond zombies, right? And Code Veronica introduces the Bandersnatch. You've got enemies that are probably based off of the Fly movie, which honestly I haven't seen, but that's just a guess. But this is the first game that really thought about like how do we go beyond zombies and started to do some interesting stuff. It was also the first game after the big cliffhanger at the end of Resident Evil 2. If you're a fan of the quote unquote lore, this was the game that kind of continued off of everyone's going to Europe to take down Umbrella. What happens next? And that was kind of exciting at the time. And I think it adds a little bit to the game, though it's not really a big focus. We didn't talk about the for the original Resident Evil. There's a couple of games that are in the rumor mill to be the next remake. I feel like the Code Veronica remake has been one that people have been saying is coming for a while. It's the one that I don't see getting remade anytime soon. Personally, if you know where the story goes in Code Veronica, you might understand why. It's the one that has aged the worst, possibly. The other one that's on the docket is the original Resident Evil, so we'll go back and talk about that for a second. I do think that it might be time to remake the original Resident Evil. And my feeling on this is that I don't think it replaces the original Resident Evil remake any more than any of the other remakes have replaced the other games. Because it kind of is clear to me, and Requiem made this very clear, and we'll get there in a minute, that the new Resident Evil series is kind of like its own branch. And I feel like if that's the route that they're going, then maybe it's worth remaking the original Resident Evil in that style. So I'd be fine with a new Resident Evil remake. I don't, I'm still gonna play the original. I'm still gonna prefer it. Let's be honest. But I think that makes more sense than a Code Veronica remake. I have a feeling we're just never gonna touch Resident Evil Veronica again. Anyway, that's my feelings there. Code Veronica, fun game. Maybe look up the plot before you play it just to see if it's your thing, but otherwise, it's some solid Resident Evil right there. Gaiden. Again, I could say what I said about Survivor, right? Like, I miss when games experimented. I miss when games did cool things. Gaiden, you know, we gotta be honest. It's a D. I haven't finished the game. I've only really dabbled with it, but it's really hard to play that game for any more than like 15-20 minutes before you say, all right, I got it. Cool, what you were going for, I guess. It's neat. I mean, I think that it having the first person battles that are reminiscent of Gone Home, the series that inspired Resident Evil, I think that's neat, although the battles aren't really anything like Sweet Home other than the perspective. It was a neat handheld interpretation of Resident Evil. That was the solution to the problem beyond the ill-advised, though definitely interesting, port of the original game they were going to do for Game Boy Color that you can find the prototype out there and play if you really want to try that out for size. It's a high D, but let's be real, it's a D. Gun Survivor 2. I want to say I've never played this. However, I'm pretty sure that I did at least once try this game, though I don't know what the context would be. If you're not familiar, this is not a sequel to the original Gun Survivor. It is essentially a railgun shooter version of Code Veronica. And it's interesting simply because this will not be the last time they remake a game as a rail shooter. And really what Gun Survivor 2 is is it's the prequel to the Umbrella Chronicles series, or the Chronicles series, I guess we'll call it. Which is interesting, right? But it is a railgun shooter. It's a spinoff. I guess I'm just gonna put it in didn't play because I don't remember. If I did play it, I don't remember enough about it. It's a railgun shooter, but like there's only so much you can do with those, which they definitely pushed it with later games, but we'll get there. Resident Evil Zero, yeah, it's a high C. It goes above Resident Evil Survivor. What I remember of this game is just that it was really annoying to play. I think that like when people talk about the classic Resident Evil games, they talk about them in a way they are just annoying. I kind of feel like this is the point where the classic games are kind of starting to spin their wheels from a design standpoint. Now, personally, I would have been fine if they just stuck with Code Veronica style, where we don't the games cost too much to do Resident Evil 2 again. We're never gonna have the character zapping system from Resident Evil 2. That's fine. If we just want to do, you play this part of the game as this character, you play this part of the game as a different character, I would have been perfectly fine with that. I think that for most players and for companies looking to make new games, they have to think about, well, how do we spin this? How do we change this up? How do we try and do different things? Plus, we have this Resident Evil engine that we made for the remake, so we got Resident Evil Zero. Neat game, neat attempt, mostly just kind of a pain to play. I guess I should say, if you haven't played it, you basically control two players at the same time, and the way that it works is that like one character is able to go in one direction, our character is able to go in another direction. You press a button, you swap over to that character, and then they move, they look around. It's actually similar to how Sweet Home works. But each character has their own distinct inventory and their own distinct skill set, so you can only do certain things or get past certain obstacles with one character. You can drop items and leave items for the other player as you're kind of swapping back and forth between both players, which is tedious. Cool idea in theory, but kind of tedious. I would like to replay this game. It is another one that they keep saying they are going to remake. If they remake it, I'm not going to say that they're not going to remake it. I think that it has higher odds than Code Veronica. If they are going to remake it, I imagine it's going to be in for a lot of changes. I don't know that the main villain of the game works as well, in a different way than the Ashfords from Code Veronica. I don't know. It's kind of an odd game, and it's not very well remembered, which means that it probably should be remade, but that's typically not the kind of thing that gets remade. Point in case, have you ever seen Billy come up in another game before? Yeah, that's what I thought. So, anyway, it's a C. Resident Evil Dead Aim. I know this is a C. Possibly a high. You know what? I answered my own question. I was kind of like curious if I liked Dead Aim more or less than Survivor. I think I like it less than Survivor. I only played it the one time, so my opinion could change. I'll probably try it again someday. For now, I'm just gonna put it as a high D. Weird game. The only thing I really remember is the villain turns into a tyrant with built-in high heels, as in like her feet have high heels. Like that's just what her feet are. It's weird. Play it if you want. It's okay. It's not. D isn't terrible. I probably should have added an F to this list, although I don't think any game would go in the F column, honestly. It's fine. Takes place on a boat if you like boats. We need to rip the band-aid off on this one. We just gotta rip the band-aid off. Listen, I think the thing that I surprised myself just now is that I put it above Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. I don't hate Resident Evil 4. I mean, look, I put it above Resident Evil 0. It's in the B column, right? Did I just put what's widely considered one of the greatest video games of all time and gave it a B? At the end of the day, what this really boils down to, if I remove all the nostalgia out of it, if I remove my attachment to the classic Resident Evil games, what it all boils down to for me is it's a shooter. Maybe you got this from me talking about Survivor and Dead Aim. I'm not a huge fan of shooters. I get that Resident Evil was starting to get long in the tooth. I think that's what Resident Evil Zero is a product of. I get that the series needed to change direction. The direction just happened to be something that does not appeal to me nearly as much as the original two Resident Evil games. That's really what it comes down to. There's some personal quibbles too. I'm not a big fan of Leon in this game. The weird action hero one-liners, if anything, it just takes me out of it. Like Resident Evil is silly, but I think it like this is the first time that Resident Evil ever just kind of like knowingly nodded that it was silly, knowingly winked at it. I like, and I don't know that I could have articulated this back then. I can articulate this a lot better now. I think that I liked that the original Resident Evil took itself seriously. Like, it never took itself too seriously, but it didn't feel the need to, like, wink at the camera, right? And, you know, I'm not saying that Resident Evil 4, like, breaks the fourth wall or anything. I'm just saying that the game doesn't take itself too seriously. They took my personal favorite character, just, like, absolute, out of his depth weirdo Leon S. Kennedy, and turned him into, well, let's be real, a different type of weirdo, but like one that the game wants to pretend is cool, right? Like I think that especially with Requiem and its depiction in Requiem, I think that the current thought on Leon is that he's still kind of a weirdo loser, but one that like thinks that he's cool, right? That is not how the original Resident Evil 4 treats him. All the girls flirt with him, including including one weird, uncomfortable scene with an underage woman. That's not how the original Resident Evil 4 was playing it. Like, no, he was supposed to be a badass character. And I even remember friend of the show, Bran, my best friend, made a graphic. Like, we were making fun of the game before the game actually came out. From one of like the screenshots in a magazine of Leon doing the weird flip kicks. They put a text box on it that said, "Thank God I spent all those years training under Mr. Miyagi." Again, the game is leaning into the silliness now in a way that just takes me out of it. If I'm being honest with you, I'm like, go back to the Dead Rising episode of the podcast. I love silly. I love games that like wink and nod at the camera. That's not what Resident Evil was. That's not what I went to Resident Evil for. And then, like, again, like, just on personal matters, if you do care about the lore, like, I was invested in the we're gonna take down Umbrella storyline. I wanted to know what was gonna happen when they got to Umbrella. And if you were, like, really paying attention, you realize that there were, like, multiple entities of Umbrella that were doing all of this weird infighting and everything, and all of those stories just get cut. It's just like the game just opens with there's no more Umbrella, and that's it. Now, of course, Wesker comes back and they do a bunch of other stuff and connect it in and everything. But, like, you know, that main plot arc was just cut right there. And, you know, it's not the biggest thing. The game is fun. Like, I can't deny it's a really fun game and I like it a lot. But it's not the kind of game that I'm going to go back to a million times. I've probably played it 3 times overall. As for the game, I felt the same way that I did back then, which is this is cool and it's very well made. It's not for me. It's not for me. But it still gets a B. And I still put it up above Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. Listen, it had better puzzles. I didn't get stuck on the stupid puzzles as much. Resident Evil Umbrella Chronicles. I think it has to get a C, and I think it goes below Survivor solely on that I didn't finish it. I like the game. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's really interesting for a rail shooter. I think it's a neat game. I think it kind of has that same like thing that Survivor has of like, man, I miss games that could just do weird stuff, right, outside of indies. And you just don't get like developers doing weird stuff and weird experiments like the Umbrella Chronicles. Neat idea, neat way to like start to like condense and make the lore kind of start to make sense outside of all the extra materials that you had to read and do. If you were just a fan following along with the series up to that point, Umbrella Chronicles, neat game. 5. So I'm struggling with this one a little bit too, and not, you know, again, I've already got it out there. New Resident Evil style is not for me. Not a big fan of shooters, but I don't think it's uncontroversial to say either this game does not have the juice, does not have the juice that 4 does. I think I'll be fair. I think I'm gonna be fair, and I'm gonna put it as C, but I am gonna put it below Resident Evil Zero because listen, I've played Resident Evil Zero like 2 or 3 times. I never finished 5. I made one attempt to finish it and didn't go very well. I got a lot farther on my second try, and then I got to the pyramids where they have these like instant kill lasers, and it's so hard to move in this game. Like 3D games of the Xbox 360 era were always kind of weird. I also didn't like, I remember I tried the multiplayer. I feel like this was a game that maybe would have worked better if the multiplayer worked. But this was also the era of you either had to play online if you wanted like the real experience. But I remember me and my friend, my friend Chris, trying the multiplayer, and you like each player just got this tiny box. You didn't get like the full split screen like you would on any of these other games. You just got like this little tiny box on each side of the screen, and it's because we were just starting the HD era. We did not have powerful enough GPUs to do proper screen rendering for full screen split screen. I get it. I understand it. Did not make that game fun to play. So I might have liked it better if I had the real multiplayer experience. Never got the opportunity to do that. The split screen is just a non-starter. Resident Evil 5, it's a C. The next Chronicles game, Dark Side Chronicles. Yeah, I've got a shirt from this. I forget why I got that shirt. If it was for an event or something else. Um, Remake of one of my favorite games of all time, and I think it's slightly worse than the Umbrella Chronicles. Not much worse. Not much worse. It's fine. It's more or less the same thing, just in a story that I'm more familiar with and enjoy. Novelty wore off at that point, I guess. I don't know. I don't really have much to say about the Dark Side Chronicles. Neat that they exist. The Mercenaries 3D for the first 3DS game. I mean, okay, so I know what I just said before about like not liking Resident Evil 4 or Resident Evil games as shooters. I like the Mercenaries. I've always liked the Mercenaries game. If honestly, I'm like already thinking, oh, maybe I bump out Nemesis because Nemesis introduced Mercenaries. Always been a fan of Mercenaries. It's the best part of Resident Evil 4, honestly. So, but do I want that as like a solo experience? Yeah, I don't think I do. And yeah, and playing it on handheld too. Yeah, I think this is a D. And I think it goes above Gaiden, but 3D is a D. All right, Revelation. So I remember at the time I liked this game a lot. I played it on 3DS first, and I really, really liked it. And I was like, oh yeah, it's a return to form. This is honestly like the first real attempt. Maybe this is like much to say, but I kind of feel like Resident Evil Revelations is the prototype for Resident Evil 7. Because it's the same idea, right? Like we're gonna use like modern Resident Evil gameplay, but try to like match it with that classic style. Like the game opens with kind of an escape room sequence, and then Jill's on a boat. We're on a boat again. Um, yeah, game's okay. It's more or less what you would expect. I think that gives it a C. You know what? Yes, I do like it better than Resident Evil 5. It's going to go above Resident Evil 5, but below Resident Evil 0. It's fine. I don't think I would ever play it again, though. Earlier I said I should have added an F to the tier list because I don't think anything else gets a D. Anything is going to go into F. But, I mean, listen, I was at E3 when they were first demoing this game. They demoed it behind closed doors, and I was so curious. I wanted to take a look. At that point I knew the big thing about this game. So if you're not aware, Resident Evil 6 has 3 different styles of game, not two, not just two. It has 3 styles of game. You have one side where you play Leon, and who's paired with Leon? Is it Sherry paired with Leon, or is it someone else paired with Leon? I don't think it's Sherry. I think Sherry has the weird stuff with Wesker's brother. Someone's paired with Leon to do Resident Evil 4 style gameplay in this game, where like the president gets killed and all this weird stuff goes down. You're playing his storyline, and then you're playing another storyline where if I'm remembering correctly, it's been a long time. You play as Sherry Birkin, and Wesker's brother that you didn't know he had, um, and they have this like weird action gamey kind of thing that someone on Blue Sky was like saying, not enough people played enough Resident Evil to see all the weird John Wick stuff that you can do. Um, in Resident Evil 6, and I guess that's true. I don't know that I wanted to deal with the terrible controls to like really get into that. And then there was another gameplay mode where you play as Chris Redfield basically doing Resident Evil Gears of War. And listen, the audacity of that, like I just said, I really like audacious games, right? And if they had did a spin-off that was just the Chris Redfield segments, I probably would have been into that because I've only played a little bit of Gears of War, and yeah, I'm not a big shooter person, but again, if it's a spin-off and you're Chris Redfield, which after Resident Evil 5, that's the character that makes the most sense to do that, and we're just doing our own version of Gears of War in the Resident Evil world. Oh man, that would have been so cool. Again, that part of the game was weird but kind of neat, but it's dragged down by the fact that this whole game is just a hodgepodge mess. Like, no one knows what they're doing, no one knows what they want the game to be, so they tried to make it every single game that they possibly could. And that makes it a weird contrast with the later Resident Evils that we're going to talk about in a second. But it's no good. I remember I played like an hour of it, and I remember I think the first part is the Leon parts, which should be the most like normal parts of the game, and I laughed and I was like, "Oh, this is bad. This sucks." And if it's me playing a new Resident Evil game, and my first thought is like, I am amused at how much it's terrible. Um, yeah, it's not a good game. That might be outside of some of these like weirdo didn't plays, that might be the worst game in the series easily. Revelations 2. Yeah, so I just called Resident Evil 6 the worst game in the series, and this is controversial. I'm gonna put this out there. I know a lot of people really like this game. I know a lot of people really like this game. I remember it getting good reviews when it came out, and I was excited because you got to be Claire, and we got to be like middle-aged Claire, who's a journalist now, and she's got this cool leather jacket. Like, Claire looks awesome in this game. And also Moira Barry. We never got my boy Barry to back in another game, or playable in another game, and we're not including Gaiden in this, right? So but like his daughter is now adult age, and like, she's gonna be a character, and I think that the character swapping in this game, which is kind of like Resident Evil 0, except that the two characters stick together. It's sort of like a blend of Resident Evil 0, Resident Evil 5. I think they were doing really interesting things with it in Revelations, but it's just the game just does not gel for me. I didn't finish it. I got really really frustrated with one of the combat segments of the game, and I couldn't get past it, and I eventually just gave up on it. And um, yeah, just it's hard for Resident Evil games to hold my attention as shooters, so it's gonna be doubly so if they're difficult shooters. And Resident Evil 2 Revelations just didn't work for me. Never got to see what the revelation was. Resident Evil 7. I've gone this entire time without giving a game an A. So I guess we're going to have to give our first A to Resident Evil 7. I did not know what to expect. I was really excited by the previews, and I was like, this looks like this could be pretty cool. Any misgivings I had about the fact that didn't seem to have any of the characters that I enjoy, the fact that it has a completely different aesthetic, we're going a different direction for this game. I think all of those things primed me to get ready for something different, right? And it was different, but also it was the same. It was a return to the gameplay that I personally enjoy about Resident Evil. I'm in a mansion, I'm collecting doohickeys, I'm solving puzzles, I'm managing my inventory, I'm thinking about the things that I need to do. Um, and on top of that, the best unkillable monster outside of maybe the original nemesis, the Barkers, specifically the father, at the beginning of the game is such a cool experience. Like it's intelligently designed. It doesn't get overwhelming. I typically do not like unkillable monsters in games. They just become frustrating and they stop being scary. Nemesis works in Resident Evil 3 because it's random chance, it's on a timer, and you can possibly defeat the monster. It's similar with the tyrant in Resident Evil 2 that stalks you in the B games, right? The Barkers, I don't believe, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong on this, I don't believe that the Barkers are possible to kill or temporarily stop and get a bonus item the same way that you would with Nemesis. However, their segments are short. They operate on interesting logic for you to be able to kind of smartly work around them. Um, and they feel like you're being stalked by real characters. And there's also these really interesting moments. There's interesting moments that'll happen. Like there's a segment that happens that I missed on my first playthrough. I think a lot of players are just never going to see it. Where the dad catches you and you have to go through this like wild sequence. I don't want to spoil for anyone if you haven't seen it. That's all really cool. The game also has sort of a winking sense of humor, but it's not overbearing like Resident Evil 4. Like it wears its Evil Dead inspiration on its sleeve. But it's also dark. It's also scary in a lot of interesting ways. I really, really jive with the story of this game. Again, it wasn't connected to Resident Evil, the main plot line for the most part. Like it's connected, but it's a new story. But I think it really does interesting things with like the ways that big corporations affect the lives of people, just like everyday people in a way that like the original Resident Evil games sort of kind of not really tackle. I really like Mia in this game, Ethan's wife. Like I don't want to get spoilers here, but like Mia is kind of a major part of this plot, even though she begins as a damsel, quote unquote, at the beginning, and then they do an interesting twist with that, where I would honestly call her the main character of Resident Evil 7. Ethan's more of a player cipher, and yeah, that was interesting to me. I think the things that they do with Mia and sort of the other character, the other side of this is Zoe. I think they do interesting things with both characters, but primarily Mia Winters is an interesting character. I thought about her journey in this game quite a lot after it was done, which made me excited to want to follow more about these characters later on for future sequels. Then Chris Redfield shows up, and he's a different Chris. He does, like, even his face, he doesn't look like Chris. They do start to introduce with the DLC more of the classic Resident Evil elements to try and like start a new branching story that they didn't follow up on. Spoiler alerts. We'll talk about Village in a minute. And all of that stuff is kind of whatever. The Ethan stuff and moreover the Mia stuff though, that was all very interesting, and I was really cool with that. And so great game, really really enjoyed it. Would go back and play it again. Will definitely go back and play it again someday. Just like I like replay all of the classic Resident Evils. So like bravo, what a great return for the franchise. And then they immediately follow that up with remaking my favorite game in the series. What was I thinking with this one? I mean, like at the time, I remember thinking I kind of wanted to see what Resident Evil 2 looked like if it got like the RE1 remake treatment. And that's not what the Resident Evil 2 remake is, if I'm being 100% honest. Some people might disagree with this. I think some people probably look at the Resident Evil 2 remake and think that it's like the Resident Evil 1 remake. But here's the thing. Resident Evil 1 remake to me feels like the same game as the original Resident Evil. It's a remixed version. It's sort of like the director's cut arrange mode, but it's the same game. There are neat little twists and surprises if you're used to the game, but for the most part, it is a challenge. Again, it's a challenge mode version. We went over this. It's a challenge mode version of the original Resident Evil. Resident Evil 2 is more of like the classic style of remake, right? This is the game. This is what you think of when you think of a remake. It's modern graphics. It's a new take on the same story. It's familiar and different all at the same time, and it's built on the bones of Resident Evil 7, which at the time was interesting. The later remakes and Requiem, it's now less interesting. With time, I thought that that was a really really interesting thing that they took what they did with 7 and then made it third person to do this remake. I thought, I think as a game developer, I just also really really appreciate that, right? So where does it stand on the list then? Heart of hearts, being honest and trying to again like take my own biases and feelings about the original game as high as they are. I think it's a B. And I think it's above Code Veronica, but I think it's a B. So in a lot of ways, it's kind of the same game as Resident Evil 2, but it is not. And I think the biggest thing really is just the fact that like Resident Evil 2 was always going to kind of be a remake. So there's no way that it could necessarily be as audacious as that second game was, but it's also less of that game, right? Like you don't have the four different versions of the game. And not only don't you have the four different versions of the game, Claire A and Leon B are or Leon A and Claire B are essentially the same game. It's not even as different playing it the second time with the other character. The changes just aren't nearly as big in that sense. um they have these new sequences that you have to do, and if we're being honest, they make it worse. The Sherry running and hiding from Chief Irons is not a fun segment. It's just not. I mean, again, I don't really like the unkillable stealth mode, forced stealth in games. Like, who likes forced stealth in games? And it doesn't work here. It's an unnecessary addition, and it also just makes Chief Irons a worse character, honestly. Like they taking like what was subtext in Resident Evil 2 is like kind of like taking the advantage of the zombie situation to do his own version of the most dangerous game. And they make it like so explicit and also weird because he's chasing children now, and I don't know, it's just kind of gross, and it doesn't really add a lot to the game. And that's really one of my other big problems with this game is that like it takes elements of the original game and extrapolates them into what I can best describe as C plots from The Walking Dead. One of the first characters you meet in the original Resident Evil 2, Robert Kendo, he holds you up in his store, and then he's just like, but he's like, oh, sorry, thought you were a zombie. You'll be safe in here, and then he immediately gets eaten, and it's a surprising segment when it happens. It's sort of a blink and you miss it. It's a very short thing. It gets extrapolated into this big, oh, he's protecting his daughter, and his daughter has been bitten and is already sick, and he knows that she's dying, and he's not willing to let her go. And this just becomes this big character moment for Leon, or at least I might be misremembering. It might not be as big of a deal as they try to make it in Requiem, but we'll get there. um and the whole time I'm thinking, I've seen this plot a million times, I've watched a lot of zombie media, I know. Maybe I'm just cynical. Maybe I'm just cynical because I'm so used to it, but I'm also like kind of like I get it. Leon is boring as F. Claire's still cool. I mean, I think Claire gets a lot more to do in Resident Evil 2, both games. So I like Claire in both versions of the game. Leon is a bore in this one. And because he's a bore, the stuff with Ada just comes off as weirder and creepier than the Ada wait crying from Resident Evil 2, the original game, where he's just a weird loser and it's kind of endearing. He kind of like Resident Evil 2. Leon wants to be Captain America so bad. He just wants to be Captain America, and you just can't quite get there, right? Just again, it feels so forced and silly. Resident Evil 2, Leon is a nothing burger of a character, and yeah, no. Resident Evil 2 remake is fine. It plays great. Like all of my nitpicking aside, it is still a high B. And I think like one of the things that's going to define these later Resident Evil games is that, they're able to turn them around really quickly. They've got a great engine for it, and that's what's defining, the next few games we're going to look at this list. They can just turn them around really, really quickly. And Yeah. So, Resident Evil 2 is still really good. It's still a really good game, and the remake is really good. I just don't like a lot of the additional stuff that they added to it. And the stuff that they took away is what gave that game its character. So, in the end, it's a solid Resident Evil game. You're not going to go wrong with it. So, likewise, Resident Evil 3 Remake, it's either a low B or a high C, and I'm going to have to go with high C, I think. So, take everything I just said about Resident Evil 2 and just apply it to Resident Evil 3. I was really, really hopeful for Resident Evil 3 because it has this amazing intro where Jill, a character who, again, in the original games doesn't really have much of a character. You know, you just have this kind of idea of who Jill is in your head, and it's probably your own idea because there's not much in those original games. And it starts to give her some interesting character. I love that it starts with her looking in the mirror. I love that the game like kind of starts to contend with these characters having been through a lot. Like if I were doing my remakes of Resident Evil, if I were going to like really like think about these games, I would like start with these characters and think about everything that they have been through. I would have them, it's sort of an overdone word to say at this point, but trauma, they've been through a lot. And I think that, like, focusing on, Jill went through this traumatic experience um, with the original Resident Evil mansion that she can't get over, and it like looks like they're gonna start playing with a little bit of that with this introduction, and then having to go through it again. I think like a fantastic intro, fantastic opening to the game, and then after that, it's basically just a fine Resident Evil game. It's very linear. Um, but the thing that I think drags it down is just Nemesis is not interesting. He's not interesting at all. There's these he's just a scripted segment that just happens. What made Resident Evil 3 Nemesis so interesting was that he could appear at any time. There was like there were certain rooms that had like a dice roll, and if the dice didn't land in your favor, then you were going to get chased by Nemesis for a while. Here it's just scripted segments that are meant to happen, and there are some of parts in the Resident Evil 3 Nemesis that were scripted, right? But here they're all scripted. And what's so baffling about this is that this was the game that followed Mr. X in Resident Evil 2 Remake, which we didn't talk about. Um, Full disclosure, don't like Mr. X in Resident Evil 2 Remake. Number one, he appears in both versions of the game, whether you're playing Leon as Claire. It doesn't matter if it's your first time playing or the second playthrough. He's always he appears somewhere midway through the game and is just always chasing you through the police station. Hate that. Hate that. It's cool tech, and it's cool that they did it, but it also makes that game exhausting to play in a way that Resident Evil 2 was not. But then they have this version of Nemesis that just works like Mr. X did in Resident Evil 2, the original game, where it's just scripted sequences that are always going to happen. And that's just not interesting at all. Like it's less interesting than and also less exhausting than the Tyrant from Resident Evil 2 remake, but it's also less interesting than the Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, the thing that made Resident Evil 3 a game worth playing at all. Like Resident Evil 3 Nemesis would be a lot lower on this list if the Nemesis wasn't such an interesting thing to contend with. That it's not nothing burger in this game. So yeah, Resident Evil 3 remake definitely felt like a quick cash in, especially after going from 7 and Resident Evil 2 remake, which again is reusing stuff from Resident Evil 7. Like by this point, it's starting to feel like, oh, I don't know about these games. But then they come in with 8. And I think I just put it right exactly where this game goes. Look, it comes right back to this game. If Resident Evil 7 was a return to form for the original Resident Evil series, Village it's a return to form to Resident Evil 4. I'm already, like, kind of checked out. But that's really not the biggest problem with this game, honestly. I mean, then like it has more of this like weird gothic setting that is cool. And honestly, that's probably my favorite thing about it. If I'm being really honest with all of you, I think it's like it's a different setting. It's something Resident Evil hasn't really done before. They were going to dabble with it in some of the earlier prototype versions of Resident Evil 4, which looked more interesting to me. You fight werewolves in the game. That's kind of cool. There's a big lady who's also a vampire. That's kind of cool. There's a guy. There's a Nazi calling himself Heisenberg, who the voice actor decided to make sound like Nicolas Cage for some reason, and that's weird and cool and interesting. Biggest thing for me on this game is that it's more Resident Evil 4, and it's a fine Resident Evil 4 like, but not my game. It's a bad follow up to 7 too, though. Um, they try to focus on Ethan a lot more, but Ethan is just a player cipher. Like, he was always a player cipher in 7, even if you didn't like Mia or didn't attach yourself to Mia in the same way that I think I did with the original 7. Um, 8 is just like so focused on Ethan Winters being this interesting character that he is absolutely not. The only thing I can tell you about the man is that he does not take care of his hand well enough. um and they do this weird plot thing with Chris, and try to make Chris seem like he's going to be a bad guy who now looks completely different than he did in 7, kind of looks like he did in 5, and it's going to be a weird fake out, which also makes everything with Mia um kind of weird. And full disclosure, like, Mia's kind of a nothing character in this one. um the game starts with her being awful and annoying, and I remember thinking at the time, like, wow, like, they did not go the direction I thought they were going to go after Resident Evil 7 with that character. And then, there's a twist that I don't want to get into, but, like, it's kind of what they kind of reveal, just kind of reveals that Mia is kind of nothing. She's kind of sidelined in this game, and after Resident Evil 7, that feels pretty bad. And then there's a lot of tenuous connections to the original Resident Evil games. It almost feels like, and I don't know who the writer of 8 was. The writer of Resident Evil 7 was the writer for the Fear games, which I haven't played, but I know enough about Fear that when I heard that it was the guy who wrote the Fear games, who wrote the Resident Evil 7 plot, I was like, that makes sense. I don't think it was the same writer for Village, and it feels like Village was trying to do a lot of legwork to make the Ethan Winters story and the Ethan Winters plot line converge with all of Resident Evil. And by this point, the original Resident Evil is a mess. Everything, from the original games to the later post 4 games to the 3D movies that I've only seen like half of. The lore is a mess at this point, and trying to like fit that in the most hackneyed ways possible, to try and make Chris seem like, again, I would love to like think more about who these characters are, especially after years and dealing with all of this. I think that's a really interesting angle, and Resident Evil 8 does not do it. like we know Chris isn't a bad guy, like, even after all that stuff in Resident Evil 7 about how he's with Umbrella now, but Umbrella might be good, but it's not Umbrella. I think they drop all of that in Village and later Resident Evil 9 anyway. Chris is kind of a nothing character in this game too, let's be honest. um it's fine, and if you're just here for the gameplay, and you just want solid Resident Evil 4 style shooting, it's cool, you'll get that. And yeah, solid B game. Nah, probably not going to play it again, or at least not for a long time. 4 remake. Yeah, I gotta be honest with you, I haven't played this yet. It keeps going on sale. I just haven't found a price point yet that I'm willing to pay for it. Like, when the game came out, I played Resident Evil 4 HD remake, and again, that's a fan mod. If you haven't played the Resident Evil 4 HD from fans, that's what I would say do. I gotta give this one a shot. Everything I've seen about it, from what I can tell, it's just Resident Evil 4 again. Like, if anything, it looks like this remake plays it way too safe. They kept in some of Leon's silly lines, and they've still tried to keep the game kind of silly. I kind of get the vibe that it feels like what Resident Evil 2 did, however, where it's like, it can be silly, but it can't be too silly, and we have to, like, again, try to like make this a little bit more Walking Dead feeling for some reason, even though I don't think that's what anyone came to Resident Evil 4 for, or Resident Evil as a series for, really. Yeah, I'll play it someday, and I'll form a better opinion then, I think. But you know what I have played? I've played Resident Evil Requiem, and I think I'm gonna need to play this game again to like really have a solid ranking. I've only played through it the one time, and these days, as a 30 or 40 something year old, I really can't replay games like immediately after. I have to move on to something else. There's just too much to play. There's too many things I want to do, including making tier lists like this, I guess. Um, so I have to play it again to like really give you a solid answer. But I will say, like, this is a game that like when I first played it, probably would have been could have been up here. Could have been up here. Um, oh, so good. But I think that in my memory, the more I think about it, the farther and farther it follows. And I think for now, I think I'm gonna give it an A, but it's below Resident Evil 7. I want to stress though, I think this game is a miracle that it is as good as it is because Resident Evil is once again where it was when Resident Evil 6 was a thing. Because 6 was, we don't know what this franchise is anymore. We don't know what it wants to be. We don't know what the fans want. We're just throwing everything at the wall and seeing what sticks. Requiem is an anniversary game, which I think is one of the things that's weighing it down a little bit. We'll talk about that in a second. But again, it's built on the RE engine, and it tries to have its cake and eat it too, in the same way that Resident Evil 6 did by having this one character, Grace, who gameplay is closer to Resident Evil 7, which again is not quite the same, but mimics the original style of Resident Evil games. But also you play as Leon, and when you play as Leon, it's more of that Resident Evil 4 style of gameplay from Village, and it goes back and forth between those two styles, and it actually works in this one. It's the first time in Resident Evil history where they tried to do both styles of gameplay or tried to do multiple styles of gameplay, and it actually works. There's some caveats to that, but it mostly works. I also really enjoy, I think this is again an attempt to try to get back to basics with the Resident Evil plot. It carries forward some things, including drop plot lines from the classic Resident Evil games, um, and tries to like merge them in with stuff from the newer games, like, and by newer I mean like post 4 games, as well as the Winter's trilogy, Winter's duology. Yeah, I love Grace's gameplay for the most part. I don't think it's as tight as the other Resident Evil games. Like, we live in an era now where I don't think it can be, and like that could be a rant in and of itself. In order to make the classic style of Resident Evil work, like it did with 7 and did with 9, they have to like follow a lot of modern design conventions. I don't think the things that I like about Resident Evil work now in a modern game in 2026, 2027, and so on forth. So I think that like you're never going to get that like feeling of I have to like I'm in this like place that I don't know and don't understand and really have to like take my time and cautiously map, and this game is just too designed with modern UI elements and just modern level design to a way to try and minimize players getting lost. Like Resident Evil, you could get lost, you could get turned around. Like the mansion is such a small space, but if it's your first time playing, like the game is almost counting on you getting lost because at the end of the day it's a 5-hour game. Resident Evil Requiem, they spent hundreds of millions of dollars on it. It's a 20-hour game. No, they don't want you getting lost. That would be silly. You might turn the game off then, and we can't have that. So the Grace segments are not as tightly designed as the original Resident Evil, or if anything they're too finely tuned. They still do a lot of really cool things. I really like the fact that the zombies in her segment are like, they all feel unique. Like there's a couple of zombies that are just generic zombies, but for the most part they're like unique zombies with unique backstories and unique personalities, and all of that comes through. They feel dangerous again in a way that the original Resident Evil felt dangerous. We didn't talk about one of the problems I had with Resident Evil 7 is that the mold are just not interesting enemies. And yet Requiem has really, really interesting things that they do with zombies of all things. These zombies are more like Land of the Dead. If you've ever watched the George A. Romero movies, they're more like the Land of the Dead zombies, and that's really interesting. So I really like the Grace segments playing them. I do not like Grace as a character. Do not like her at all. The stammering thing got old very quickly. I'm going to use an academic term. There's ludonarrative dissonance because Grace is actually more competent in gameplay than she appears in the narrative, which in the narrative just does not appear confident at all, especially next to Leon, which also kind of feels weird. As for the Leon segments of the game, so early in the game, the Leon segments they feel like bonuses, right? It feels like Grace is the main gameplay, and then like you play Leon for 5 or so minutes just as like a pace breaker. That works really, really well, and I enjoyed that. And Leon is Leon from Resident Evil 4. He's very quippy in this game. But the quipping kind of works because everything feels silly. And it almost feels like because Grace's tone is one thing and Leon's tone is another thing, it almost makes the silly tone of the Leon segments work a little bit better than when it's the whole thing, like in the original Resident Evil 4. So Leon segments are cool, and honestly, I think I actually enjoyed playing the Leon segments a lot more than I did like a lot of stuff in Resident Evil 4 until we get to the second half of the game when the game basically just becomes Resident Evil 4. And again, and I say it becomes Resident Evil 4. Honestly, it might be closer to Resident Evil 5. And that's not a compliment. When you are playing the segment of the game that is primarily Leon. That is also when the game goes very heavy into nostalgia baiting. And I'll be honest with you all. I think that I kind of feel, and maybe again, this is because of my age, I kind of feel like saying something is nostalgia baiting is lazy. I think that's a lazy criticism. To just say, something is or isn't nostalgia baiting, or you only like this thing because nostalgia. I feel like that's not really sitting down with something and really thinking it through, right? I think it's just a lazy thing to shut down a conversation. Boy, did it get tiring in this game, and it didn't always work. Like I think like the weirdest thing is that there's there's this it's cute when you first see it. So you go back to Raccoon City, you go back to the police station where Leon was, and this isn't a spoiler. They put this in all of the commercials and everything. And that segment, there's like no enemies or anything. It's mostly just like play as Leon, solve some puzzles, but also like point and look at things and be like, I remember that. I remember that. And one of those I remember that is like Tofu is walking around, like the bonus character from Resident Evil 2 is just kind of like poking around, and you'll just like hear him poking around and everything, right? And they make it obvious so that you can find him. And it's like, okay, it's cute, but why is Tofu walking around? Like, this is a joke character that was only in an additional game mode. And just kind of like, I'm supposed to be having this like moment of melancholy, but like that's not what the segment is about. The segment isn't about melancholy. It's not about feeling sad. It doesn't build on any of those feelings. It really is just meant to be a point and go, I remember that. I remember that. And nothing highlights that more than just the fact that they got Tofu just wandering around making noises just to be like, hey, it's Tofu. Remember Tofu? It just sucks out all of the energy on what could have been a somewhat melancholic moment. This is further emphasized by a scene where Leon has a flashback to Robert Kendo in the Resident Evil 2 remake with his daughter, which again is from the Resident Evil 2 remake. So this implies a couple of things. Number one, it implies that the Resident Evil 2 remake is the canon version to Resident Evil 9 Requiem. Resident Evil Requiem, it is RE2 remake that happened, not the original Resident Evil. And That's weird. I mean, number one, I already mentioned I don't think that Robert Kendo scene works. I think it's something that you can just see in any generic zombie movie, and it's just kind of a whatever. It doesn't feel like Resident Evil little movie segment that they added. But also, if the segment of going around the police station is supposed to be this big nostalgia set piece scene, which again, remember, Tofu's just walking around. There's a whole bunch of like, you find the Rebecca photo and ooh, it's tied to Wesker. Like, it's just a nostalgia set piece, right? But whose nostalgia is it for? The Resident Evil 2 remake, which granted the Resident Evil 2 remake was several years ago at this point, but that's not nostalgia to the original game, so I don't know. Again, I like the idea of a Resident Evil game with the classic characters that really contends with the fact that they have been through so many of these apocalyptic events and that they have to be tired and they have to be weary. This didn't work for me. And then Hunk shows up. At least I think it's Hunk. The game wouldn't clarify if the boss fight that you do, that is both a reference to a dead character from Resident Evil 4 who had a really cool boss fight, and I like that boss fight in Resident Evil 4, but mostly because it reminds me of Metal Gear. It doesn't remind me of Resident Evil. And they do that fight again, but with Hunk, a character who has never interacted with any of these characters before, who's like, oh, I've been waiting years to fight you, Leon. But they don't even call him Hunk. Like, they don't even call him Hunk. Like, is it supposed to be Hunk? Is he just the Reaper? Who is that character? Why are they having this fight? Why are they trying to emphasize it like, oh, this is the fight you've been waiting for, even though Leon has no idea who this is? Like, and I never really imagined Hunk and Leon fighting. Like, what was that segment? Like, it was a good fight because the Krauser fight in Resident Evil 4 is good, because that kind of thing is fun to do in a Metal Gear game. It's fun. I don't know why it's here. And again, I can only think it's here because nostalgia baiting, but it's not tied to anything that happens in Requiem. It's just a weird thing that happens, and it bothers me. We have a guy who, and I know it's tied to stuff from 5 and 6. We have a guy who looks like Wesker, but he isn't Wesker, and then he doesn't do anything in the game. He's not even the game's main villain. There's so many of these decisions that just drag down Requiem in the end. Like, it's a cool game. It works way better than it should. Um, I have a feeling it's an A for now. I'm gonna keep it in the A category. We're gonna look at this list and we're gonna start reorganizing stuff in a second. But I have a feeling that when I go to replay it in 2 to 3 years, or whenever the next Resident Evil remake or Resident Evil 10 comes out, I have a feeling I'm gonna go back to Requiem and be like, yeah, this game was just kinda okay. But for now, some pretty good Resident Evil. All right, let's re-examine. Let's take a look at this. Um, yeah, I'll be honest with you. I'm not really seeing anything that I would shift. I think I did. I think I got it on. I think I got it in one, folks. I think I got it in one. Again, I know that there is going to be some controversy, quote unquote, on this list. I mean, I am curious to hear if anyone out there agrees, disagrees with me, and such. I'm not just asking you to leave a comment for engagement bait. Yes, it does help the algorithm. Yes, it does help this channel out, but this channel isn't very big anyway, and I don't know if I'm doing another one of these. If you liked it, leave a like, write a comment. Do let me know what you think of this list. I'd be curious to know if there's anyone else out there who, like me, is just kind of okay with the very good Resident Evil 4 and the later, more actiony style of Resident Evil. I would like to know if there's anyone else out there who is like me, who agrees with this list. That being said, I went in depth on a lot of things that you may or may not disagree with. You might not agree with my takes on the remake franchises, or the fact that I can kind of consider them their own separate thing. And I feel like, again, that Requiem segment with Leon thinking about what happened with Kendo kind of cements that it's a separate series from the other games, which again, why I think a Resident Evil 1 remake would be good. Do you agree with that? Do you disagree with that? I don't know. Let me know. I think there's some interesting things to say here. Just don't be a jerk. I am going to be monitoring the comments for that. Don't be a jerk. My opinions are my opinions. But if people do like this, maybe we'll do Silent Hill next. I have about as many Silent Hill opinions as I do Resident Evil opinions. Anyway, that's going to do it for me. See y'all.